So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the whole spectrum, the autism thing. Okay, so if there's a very subtle deficiency on the right side, that might cause little postural problems. But if during the development, when they're actually laying down the streets on that side, if there's a big trauma to the nervous system at that point, the right hemisphere might have a really bad deficit. And we kind of find that kids on the spectrum, we call it an unevenness of skills. They have a really good left hemisphere stuff, but the right hemisphere didn't get laid down properly, and those streets are all kind of dusty and they're not connected well. So they don't feel the inside of their body, they don't feel the interoception, and then they don't feel their outside of their body and they become sensitive too. So that whole idea of interoception, being able to feel your body, means you'll be able to feel somebody else's, like what they feel too. So often the kids on the spectrum, they seem distant, they're not connected, the whole social thing, all of that stuff is kind of limited, but they have amazing skills over here. I have a bunch of kids that have hyperlexia. They're like 1 year old and they're reading stop signs and reading words and stuff like that, but they have no idea what any of that means, but they can just say the words because they understand it from their left hemisphere. So we call that an unevenness of skills between their brains. So what we kind of do, Dr. Hall, I sent you that video of the autistic child that I worked with, right? So when we're doing our work, the network spinal care that we do, we're doing very light touches on the spine, just in little spots like that. And what we're trying to do is signal the brain to find where those dead zones are here. And we want the body to say, look, there's this area of lack of motion here. If you start to breathe into that spot, the spine will move. It'll breathe a little more. That'll stretch some of those receptors. It'll send a little more signal to the brain. The brain will start realizing these spots that aren't moving well, and it'll actually say, oh, we need to do something there. So we might see little twitches on the table. We might see people repositioning their body, breathing a little deeper into that spot to help the brain reconnect with every joint in the spine. Because every single joint in the spine, they should all be moving like this freely. When somebody's lying down, you should have a good breath and everything should separate. All that will stimulate the brain and keep it healthy. So with the autistic kids, sometimes, you saw that at the beginning, he was kind of running around and kind of hard to control. And then over time, as I was doing more and more of the visits, you see that he was starting to get calmer. And he was doing things on his own and paying attention and following instructions and things like that, right? And so that's kind of one of the things we like to do with the whole spectrum of autistic kids. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll do specific work on the left side of the body to try to send stimulation to the right hemisphere to try to balance it out. Because I don't want to do the same thing on both sides, because if you have an imbalance and you train both sides, you'll just have more of the same imbalance. So we want to try to target motion, or sometimes what I do with kids, because they don't feel their body very well, I try to squeeze their joints very firmly and squeeze that side of their body to send deep pressure stimulation to the right hemisphere, because it likes that kind of deep pressure. That helps it stimulate it as well. And sometimes you do fast little pushes, pulls on the joints, maybe that might send more stimulation to this cerebellum and over to that side of their hemisphere to create more activity, because we're trying to balance out the imbalances in their brain. And sometimes we see different things like that. So that whole concept of the interoception, I wanted to talk about one of my clients. I used to work in Italy for about 16 years. And when I was there, there was an autistic kid that the parents brought to me. He was about 18 years old and he was never potty trained. He always pooped in the diaper basically his whole life. And as we started doing the network care on him, I would see that he would move quite a bit on the table and he'd really connect with the care. And I saw the breath moving through his spine and everything was moving well. And after about a month into care, because up to that point, he would just poop and whatever. And mom would always change the diapers. The mom said he just kind of bolted across the room and he pulled his pants down and he went and he pooped on his own for the first time, because that whole interoception, the ability to feel the inside of the body, he was actually finally getting those signals to his brain. And then then he started to feel his inside and he could make more, productive things for his life and feel his body. So that was a really important thing. So just improving the proprioception from the spine to the brain, help the brain develop more, bring more of those parts online that would control the body better. And then he would start to perceiving even the inside of his body. And that helps that, the person have more functioning in his daily life. Right? That's the kind of thing I wanted to talk about there. All right. So any questions so far?
There was a question there's a question that said, how would somebody know that they're experiencing a deficit that might have been caused at birth?
Yeah, that's a challenging one, because it won't always show up as a symptom, so to speak. A lot of times, I always tell people only about 10% of our nervous system might give us like sensations. The other 90% is just like making organs function and controlling your heart beating, but you don't feel those nerves. So I always tell people basing your health on how you feel is one of the worst indicators, because there's many people that feel great now and they might die of a heart attack in 5 minutes. So they weren't really healthy 5 minutes previous, but they just didn't feel anything because nothing was bugging one of their sensory or sensation nerves. So for babies, there's a few things we look for. One of them is a head tilt. So a lot of things about our posture, I wanted to mention this too. Pretty much everything below our clavicle is just a reflex. So we really have to make sure all this works properly to have everything down below work properly. There's something in your brain called the vestibular system. And that really drives more of your spinal tone than anything else. If this side of my vestibular system is not working right and this one is working, I might feel like my body's going like this. And I'll always be pulling myself back thinking I'm falling. So regardless of how much stretching or relaxation or yoga or chiropractic, whatever, if we're not trying to improve that imbalance, this side of the body will always be tight on that person, regardless of what they try to do to make it go away. Because if the brain thinks you're falling, it's always going to do something to correct you. So one of the things we look for babies is a head tilt. So if your right hemisphere is not working efficiently, these muscles will be less inhibited, and then they'll end up having a bit of a turn like this. So a head tilt is one of the quick things we look for. The other one is a lag in their muscle tone. You pull up a baby, they should start engaging their neck pretty quickly, within a month or so, even right away. I had a lot of kids right off the bat, they're good, but it's a little worrisome if it's 1 or 2 months down the road and you pull them up like that and their head lags behind and they don't engage. That's a potential thing. The other thing would be colic, not feeding well. And one of the other things I want to give you a little gems here for the moms here. So hopefully you're breastfeeding your baby. That's the most important thing you could do for the baby's health and your health as well. But sometimes it happens that you have to bottle feed them, right? So a healthy baby should feed on both sides comfortably like this. Like a full feed will be, half the time here, half the time there. So if you think about how the baby is, when the baby's on this breast, they might be like this. So the bottom ear and this side of their body is kind of limited. And so they don't really see much out of their right eye and their right ear. But mom would naturally do the breastfeed here and the breastfeed here. So that information coming in one side is going to stimulate one side of the brain, and then the other side will stimulate the other side of the brain. So often when people are bottle feeding babies, they'll always do the side that's more comfortable for them, and they might be blocking this. So I always tell people, feed them half the time this way and switch it over. Even though it's uncomfortable for you, it's better for your baby to do this too, so that they're getting, bilateral stimulation to get those kind of things happening. So those are kind of some of the things you can look for a baby. And as a chiropractor, we'll actually use our pinky finger and go down the spine and try to find those areas, because every joint should be like springy, like my finger joint. It should just go ping, 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 ping. If it's subluxated, when I push on it, it won't be springy. It'll be a little firm to the touch, and it'll often be tender, and muscles around it will probably be tight as well. And so it's important that we kind of do this check right up through the whole spine to try to find those areas that are like dead zones, we call them, if you want to call it that. Okay. So the handout that I gave you, I want to talk about this little part as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
I'm okay to keep going?
Yeah, you're good. You just had one question before we jump into the handout. We'll do it at the end. What are causes of left side deficits that are caused from right or left side?
Okay. So left side deficits they would more likely happen after 3 years of age, because basically the brain does 3 years on one side, 3 years on the other, and it kind of switches back and forth until you get bigger. So a left side deficit will usually be a chemical trauma of some sort, like a mercury thermometer being broken or something like that, while the left side is developing. So between 3 and 6 years of age. It could be just from postural things like this. So they might be more subluxated on one side and less stimulation going to that side of the brain, depending on how they may have had a trauma when they were younger. So if the right side of the body is not moving as well, the left hemisphere might have a bit of a lack of activity and lack of connection. And so when the left hemisphere is not working right, that's often where we'll see more learning challenges and dyslexia. So because I said the left hemisphere puts things in order, and if it's not working right, then the order of the words or the order of the letters might be inverted or something like that. So they'll have difficulty like focusing or reading the words properly. So those are kind of things like that. So sometimes it's like falls and injuries. So just to give you an idea, like even what could happen like with curves, right? So if somebody gets pulled out like this, and they have a bit of a trauma on that side. If you ever been, somebody's punched you like this, you usually go, ow, when you kind of contract, right? So if there's been a trauma during the birth process or some fall or some wipeout when you're a little kid, we wipe out so many times, fall off the change table and all sorts of things. If one of those wipeouts happen at up in the upper neck, if it causes tension, it could be a right hemisphere. It could just be tension from a fall. Let's say this happens here. So when that baby starts to lift its head up, it doesn't like the horizon being crooked. So what it'll actually do is it'll actually shift the whole body like this so that the eyes stay level. But then when that kid grows up, they'll have a curve in their spine because of that reflex mechanism from the eyes, right? So those are some things that can happen. So it's really important that the eyes are level and they work in harmony and those kind of things too. So sometimes with kids, I'll do this little convergence test where I'll bring my finger towards their eyes like this. Both eyes should come in really evenly like this. But if there's a right hemisphere deficit, what might happen is the right eye might come in and then it'll kind of lose its convergence hold. Well, if I shine a light in that eye, it usually should just go pink. But if it's weak, it might go pink and then start going like that, like it's trying to hold on to the contraction. We call that a hippus thing when your eye is doing this with the sphincter in the eye. So those are all little things that we can kind of look at to gauge what might be happening. So once again, motion, movement in the spine. We want to make sure all the vertebrae are moving as freely as they can, and the spine is balanced to keep your brain balanced and have good signals coming in both sides of the body. Did that answer that? I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, no, totally. So,